Elden Ring. Well, oh my. In the hundreds of hours that it took me to beat Elden Ring, I was put through an absolute ringer of emotions. Anger, as I was beaten down by its toughest challenges, exhilaration when I finally overcame them, and a fair amount of sorrow for the mountains of experience I lost along the way to some of the toughest boss encounters FromSoftware has ever conceived. But more than anything else, I was in near constant awe from the many absolutely jaw-dropping vistas, the sheer scope of an absolutely enormous world, the frequently harrowing enemies, and the way in which Elden Ring nearly always rewarded my curiosity with either an interesting encounter, a valuable reward, or something even greater. A hand job. I mean, no, that never happened. FromSoftware takes the ball that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild got rolling and runs with it, creating a fascinating and dense open world about freedom and exploration above all else, while also somehow managing to seamlessly weave a full-on Dark Souls game in the middle of it. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that Elden Ring ended up as one of the most unforgettable gaming experiences I've ever had. Now, to set the stage, as you all know from the onset, you play as a tarnished of no renown, blessed by grace, and are compelled to make the journey to the lands between and become the Elden Lord. Oh yes, but what does that mean? What that actually means, how one might go about doing that, and what the deal is with the giant glowing golden tree are all things that you have to discover yourself. Like other FromSoftware games, the grand story is hard to fully digest on a first playthrough, especially because there's no in-game journal to refresh you on the events, characters, or unique terms you've encountered across dozens of hours. Now, there really should be, but it is a story I nonetheless enjoyed trying to piece together for myself. I look forward to supplementing that knowledge with an inevitable, painstaking, detailed lore videos that emerge from the community later. Now, it ended up being the organic stories that kept me more enthralled rather than the grand overarching plot that credits Game of Thrones' George R.R. Martin as its scenario writer. Now, FromSoft smartly doesn't change much in its approach to these from the Souls games, Bloodborne or Sekiro. You'll just naturally meet characters as you explore and discover the world and become involved in their problems, you know? There are no exclamation markers on the map, no waypoints to guide you to them, and these characters don't always flag you down or initially want or need anything from you. They're just people or things with their own agendas and goals whose stories are impacted based on your own actions or inactions. That was actually kind of refreshing in an open world as vast as this one, and it was always exciting to see a familiar face pop up again later, as I was eager to learn more about what brought them to this new part of the world and how their journey had progressed. The trade-off, of course, is that without any markers, quest log, or journal, it becomes very easy to forget what the fuck is going on, and accidentally forget plot threads and just leave them unsolved until the end. And I've already felt regret at missing out on stories that friends of mine have had. But for me, it was worth it, because even after over 100 hours, I never once felt the open world fatigue that usually sets in when my brain gets overloaded by a map absolutely full of unresolved side quest markers. Because any missed quest gives me extra incentive to continue onto New Game Plus. Freedom is the word that every aspect of Elden Ring's design connects back to. From the moment you set foot in Limgrave, the first of many interconnected regions of the lands between, you are completely free to go wherever you want. And sure, that's far from a new concept in open world games, but the way it's handled here is truly extraordinary. Now, if you wanted to, you could be an explorer and spend hours upon hours in Limgrave, delving into every mini dungeon, fighting every boss, discovering every NPC, and leveling yourself up to better prepare for what's next. Alternatively, you could follow the light of grace, guiding you towards the main path in the first major dungeon. Or you could find a hidden path to a new region that's meant for higher levels and completely bypass the first major dungeon entirely. Maybe even steal yourself a cool weapon early while you're there. Again, this is not unprecedented, but a few things set Elden Ring apart from games like Skyrim that provide a similar openness. For one, Elden Ring doesn't scale enemy levels to match your own at all. So jumping into a later region means you're always dealing with stronger enemies, making the risk-reward prospect of doing so very real. But perhaps more notably, the way its different areas are connected makes finding these new ones more than a simple matter of choosing a direction and heading towards it. Limgrave is designed very specifically with a main path in mind that takes you through Stormvale Castle, and finding a way around that truly feels like you've discovered a hidden passage or alternate route, which is a super cool feeling not present in most open worlds I've explored. You also have more freedom in how you approach combat than any previous From Software game, thanks to a bunch of familiar new systems that are used in interesting ways here. Stealth is a more viable option thanks to the addition of crouch walking, which finally lets you sneak through enemies or get behind them for a critical hit. There's now Horseback Combat too, in large open areas, which gives you more mobility and the ability to attack on both sides with your right-handed weapon. But it does have a drawback of taking away your ability to roll away from big attacks. You can craft items on the fly using materials found in the world so you can be ready for whatever situation calls for it. You can summon a large variety of creatures to fight for you. Yeah, you don't even need to play the game. You summon creatures and they'll do the work for you as long as they're good enough. Each with their own unique abilities and situational advantages. And most substantially, you can equip Ashes of War to your weapons and completely change their affinity and skill. The Ashes of War system essentially combines two elements of prior Soul games: weapon affinities and weapon skills, by making them items that you can freely equip to your armaments. For example, let's say I find a really good sword and I really like the moveset, but I'm building my character with a focus on intelligence stats, which means it won't get the kind of damage bonus it needs to be a viable weapon. If I find an Art of War that bestows a magic spell onto a weapon, I can equip it and transform it into a magic weapon, thereby giving its intelligence scaling on top of whatever skill of Ash of War it has. Best of all, if I eventually decide to respec into a different build, I can keep the same weapon and just put a different Ash of War onto it. Of course, you also have to find a specific item to unlock different affinities, but it's nonetheless an incredibly smart addition that allows for a ton of variety in your preferred weapons. And who doesn't like variety? I love it. It fucking consumes my soul. It makes me hard when I think about it in the shower, right? With water trickling down my dick. Now, the most important element of Elden Ring's philosophy, though, is the freedom to just walk away and do something else when you hit a wall. Elden Ring is hard, there's no question. Some of my hair turned white playing this game, yes, which is to be expected from a From Software game. But its difficulty surprised me. Even as someone who understands the Souls-like genre, I hit multiple points even all the way up into the moment when I reached the very last boss, when I'd unlocked paths to several bosses and simply could not make headway on any of them. But even though I hit dead ends on those paths, there were always somewhere else I could go. A region that I hadn't fully explored, an NPC quest that I had set aside for later, a light of grace indicator that I had not yet followed. There was never a point in Elden Ring when I was at a complete loss of what to do. And every time I explored those other regions and followed those alternative paths, I would find new gear and items, level up my stats, or learn new spells or skills that would eventually give me the extra edge I needed to power through a boss that had given me problems. It isn't just the promise of making my numbers go up that called me to turn over every stone on the map. The Lands Between is positively brimming with riches, intrigue, and danger at every turn. Much of what Elden Ring's open world does well can be traced directly back to the things that made Breath of the Wild stand out from the many open world games that came before it. It's that same feeling of starting out in an open world with little explicit guidance, finding something that piques your curiosity on your own, doing whatever it takes to get there, and then being rewarded for that curiosity. Now, the big difference is that in Breath of the Wild, I could usually predict what's going to happen when I get to that orange glowy thing off in the distance. I do a puzzle, unearth a shrine, do another puzzle, and probably get a cool temporary weapon and a spirit orb. Now, that's not to take away from Breath of the Wild. I mean, it was an awesome game, but the pattern became somewhat routine well before the end. In Elden Ring, by contrast, very rarely did my predictions come true. I'd head to a lake and all of a sudden get ambushed by a fucking dragon, follow a river expecting to collect some minor crafting materials, only to find a dungeon filled with enemies and traps, enter a cave and get ambushed by little goblin men, and take a seemingly unimposing elevator and find that it keeps going down further and further and further until eventually I found myself not in a small dungeon, but one of the many awe-inspiring new regions. Best of all, each of these little excursions rewards your curiosity with something worthwhile. That could be a new weapon, a new ash of war, a valuable consumable, a new creature for you to summon, a new spell, or a new NPC to talk to. There are so many unique and valuable rewards available that I never felt disappointed by my prize, regardless of the amount of effort that I put in. From Software makes all of this especially painless thanks to a number of uncharacteristically friendly features. There's a generous fast travel system with a ton of points strewn all across the map, a marker system that lets you drop points on the map to denote things like NPCs, boss locations, out-of-reach treasure, materials, and more, and a speedy spectral horse named Torrent that allows you to quickly cover ground and easily mount and dismount as the situation requires. But the thing that's most impressive about Elden Ring is that in between all of this brilliant open world design, there are also a handful of legacy dungeons that still deliver those wild linear levels that Souls fans have come to expect. These are gigantic castles, forts, manors, underground labyrinths, and more that are packed with secret areas, challenging bosses, and multiple paths that are linked via one-way shortcut doors. Now, if they were all strung together without being tied to an open world, they could probably exist on their own as Dark Souls 4. Bottom line, Elden Ring's open world exploration is a new benchmark. It's constantly exciting, rewarding, and full of moments that made me go, holy shit, in a host of different ways. As far as combat goes, Elden Ring is certainly closest to Dark Souls 3 when compared to other games in From Software's library of action RPGs, characterized by weighty attacks, careful stamina management, and a bit of a slower pace compared to games like Bloodborne and Sekiro. The two new big additions are the ability to use a guard counter. Yeah, by blocking an attack with your shield and immediately pressing the strong attack button to follow up with a crushing strike that'll leave your weaker enemies in a crumpled state. And there's also a jump attack that gives melee weapon wielders a new type of heavy attack that can also be used to stun enemies and leave them open for a critical hit. Now, they're both great additions that offer melee classes fun new tools, but for the most part, From Software has certainly adopted an if it ain't broke, I ain't fixing it approach. What really makes the combat in Elden Ring so good, though, is its enemy design and variety. Not only are a fair number of them horrifying to look at, but some of these baddies are absolutely vicious, coming at you with wild swings and combos that seemingly go on forever and can hit you from fucking 10 feet away. Others are more methodical and hide behind their shields to wait for the right opportunity to either parry you or catch you while you're winding up. Others still are weak, but can be huge threats when they ambush you with a grab that kills you in one hit. Now, many are designed to punish those who just mash the dodge roll button without care, which makes Elden Ring a very hard game. But it's a good style of difficulty, one that's less about fast reaction speeds and twitch reflexes, and more about learning, adapting, and finding those planted weaknesses in an enemy's attack patterns. The more you know about an enemy in this game, the more lethal you'll be. Knowledge is power in Elden Ring. If you know a certain enemy well enough, you can beat them even at a low level. Deciphering those tells and acting upon each moment of opportunity is a large part of why these games are so much fun. And then there are the bosses. Now, I don't want to spoil them, but there are a handful that are some of the most visually and mechanically impressive From Software has ever crafted. Some of the latter ones got really close to crossing the line in terms of what I deem fair and reasonable when it comes to life-restoring second phases after already brutally tough first phases and 2 or 3 against 1 handicap battles. But fortunately, as I mentioned before, any walls I hit were surmountable once I took the time to do something else and come back later. Now, it's no exaggeration to say that Elden Ring is From Software's largest and most ambitious game yet. And that ambition has more than paid off. Even after hundreds of hours of blood, sweat, and tears that included some of the most challenging fights I've ever fought, and innumerable surprises, there are still bosses that I left on the table, secrets that I've yet to uncover, side quests that I missed out on, tons of weapons, spells, and skills that I never used. And this is all on top of PvP and cooperative play that I've barely been able to scratch the surface of. Throughout it all, while the fundamentals of combat haven't changed much from what we've seen before, the enormous variety of viciously designed enemies and the brutal but surmountable bosses have brought its battles to a new level. Even with all the threads I didn't manage to tug on through my first playthrough, what I was treated to can easily be held against the best open world games I've ever played. Like games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild or Skyrim before it, Elden Ring is one that we'll be looking back on as a game that moved an entire genre forward. This game truly is remarkable in every fashion. Thanks again for watching, folks. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to bitch slap that subscribe button like it's 3 weeks behind on your rent. Bitch! Where's the money, bitch? Where's the money? Where is it? Also, go ahead and hit that bell icon too, because apparently YouTube thought there should be extra steps. Why not, right?
I'd like to subscribe, but first I have to click this and this and do this. Oh, it needs an email. All right, and this. Okay, fuck. Just tell me when he's uploading. Fuck!
Once you do all that, if you're lucky, at the stroke of midnight, a tiny little Averagebaters fairy might come and tickle your butthole. I hope to see you all again next time, and remember to keep on average baiting, baby.